Before we start, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you isn't a story about a simple breakup or a messy divorce. It's a story about a war that was waged against me in silence, in a language of expensive gifts and cutting compliments. A war I didn't even know I was fighting until the day I lost everything, or at least, the day they thought I'd lost everything. They planned my downfall with the precision of a military campaign, but they made one critical mistake. They never bothered to understand the woman they were trying to destroy. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small so someone else could feel big, then you'll know exactly why I did what I did next. My name is Chloe, and for 5 years, I was the woman desperately in love with Leo Hawthorne. To understand Leo, you have to understand his mother, Patricia. She was the sun around which the entire Hawthorne solar system revolved, and Leo, her only son, was her most devoted planet. Patricia was a woman sculpted from old money and expensive opinions. She moved through the world with the serene confidence of someone who had never been told no, at least not in a way that mattered. From the moment Leo brought me home, I was a project, a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. I didn't come from the right family, I hadn't attended the right schools, and I had a careers in urban planning, which she once referred to, with a dismissive wave of her hand, as playing with maps for the city. Her disapproval wasn't loud or vulgar, it was worse. It was a quiet, constant pressure, like the weight of water, that slowly erodes stone. She'd compliment my dress in a way that made me feel cheap, praise my cooking while mentioning a Michelin star restaurant. Leo used to take his ex-girlfriend too. Every kindness was a beautifully wrapped box with a scorpion inside. Leo, my sweet, charming Leo, was caught in the middle. He loved me, I truly believed that. But he was weak, conditioned from birth to seek his mother's approval above all else. He'd defend me, but always in whispers, always after the fact. "Don't mind Mom," he'd say, "that's just how she is." He treated her toxic behavior like bad weather, something to be endured rather than confronted. I spent years shrinking myself to fit into the narrow space their family dynamic allowed me, hoping that one day, my love and loyalty would finally be enough. The breakthrough, I thought, came with our wedding. After a battle of wills over everything from the venue to the guest list, which Patricia won by a landslide, she and Leo's father presented us with a wedding gift that left me breathless. A stunning 2-bedroom condo on the 18th floor of a luxury building downtown. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony that overlooked the city skyline, and the kind of granite countertops I'd only ever seen in magazines. It was an extravagant, unbelievable gesture. As Patricia handed me the sleek, minimalist keycard, she'd smiled, a rare, seemingly genuine smile. "Welcome to the family, Chloe." "Truly," I cried. I actually cried with gratitude. I saw it as an olive branch, a peace offering, a sign that I had finally, after all this time, been accepted. For 1 year, I lived in that beautiful sun-drenched lie. I decorated it, I hosted dinner parties in it, I built a life with my husband inside those walls. It was our home. I was happy. Leo seemed happy, too. Though in hindsight, I can see the cracks that were forming, the late-night phone calls with his mother, that he'd cut short when I entered the room, the way he'd deflect questions about our long-term financial planning. I ignored it all because I wanted the dream to be real. And then came the day it all ended. It was a Tuesday, I remember the date, October 12th. It was supposed to be the best day of my life, professionally speaking. I'd been working towards a huge milestone for months, a culmination of all my sleepless nights and relentless effort. I told Leo I was getting a massive promotion, a career-defining opportunity. He seemed thrilled for me. He kissed me goodbye that morning and said, "We'll celebrate tonight, Chloe. Big time. I'm so proud of you." I walked on air all day. I came home that evening, carrying a bottle of vintage champagne I'd splurged on. I walked into the condo, our home, and my heart soared at the view of the city lights glittering below. I called out his name. "Leo, I'm home." I got the champagne. He was standing in the living room, silhouetted against the window. He wasn't smiling. The air in the room was cold, sterile. My own smile faltered. "Leo, what's wrong?" He wouldn't look at me. He just held out a thick manila envelope. My hand trembled as I took it. Inside, I saw the bold, terrifying words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." My breath caught in my throat. Divorce papers. It felt like a physical blow. The champagne bottle slipped from my other hand and crashed onto the polished hardwood floor, shattering and spewing foam and glass everywhere. And that's when I saw her. Patricia emerged from the guest bedroom. Her arms crossed, a look of serene, predatory satisfaction on her face. She stepped delicately around the puddle of champagne, her expression one of utter triumph. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "it seems the celebration was a bit premature." I stared from her smug face to Leo's shame-filled one. "What is this? What is going on?" My voice was a broken whisper. Leo finally found his voice. But it was flat, rehearsed. "It's over, Chloe. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I choked out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "A year, we've been married for a year. You said you were proud of me this morning." Patricia answered for him, stepping forward as if to shield her son from my pain. "Leo has come to his senses. He realizes this marriage was a mistake, a youthful indiscretion." My head was spinning, but it was the next envelope Leo slid onto the granite countertop that truly broke me. It was an official-looking document, an eviction notice, 30 days. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. "Eviction," I whispered, the word tasting like poison. "This is my home. Our home. You can't evict me from my own home." Patricia let out a small, cruel laugh. "Oh, you poor naive girl. This was never your home." She gestured around the beautiful room, at the furniture I'd picked out, the art I'd hung. "This condo, like most of our family's significant assets, is held in the Hawthorne Family Trust. Leo is the trustee. The deed was never, not for a single second, in your name. We were just letting you stay here." The words hit me with the force of a physical assault. The gift, the olive branch, the welcome to the family. It was all a trap, a golden cage they had locked me in, knowing they held the only key. They had been planning this, not just for days or weeks. This was a year-long calculated deception. They had waited for the perfect moment to humiliate me, to strip me of my husband, my home, and my dignity all at once. They stood there, mother and son, expecting me to crumble, to pack my bags in shame and disappear from their perfect, pedigreed world forever. They expected tears. They expected begging. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that my promotion wasn't just a promotion. It was the launch of my own urban planning and design firm. And my very first contract, the one I had just signed that afternoon, was a multi-million-dollar deal with the city. A deal to seize their entire precious legacy-filled block under eminent domain, to build a new public transit hub. They thought they were evicting me from their condo. They had no idea I was about to evict them from their world. The first few hours are a blur of white noise and a deep, gut-wrenching cold. I remember the feel of the cool, smooth paper of the eviction notice under my fingertips, the ink seeming to bleed into my skin. I remember Patricia's voice, a low murmur to Leo, something about handling the cleanup as she gestured to the shattered champagne bottle. She was talking about the glass, but she was looking at me. I was the mess on their floor they needed to sweep away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not then. I was in a state of shock, so profound it felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching a terrible movie about a woman whose life had just been detonated. I packed a single overnight bag. I moved like an automaton, pulling clothes from the closet that suddenly felt like a costume wardrobe. The person who had picked out these outfits, this happy, hopeful wife, was a stranger to me now. Leo tried to speak to me once. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his face a mask of pathetic conflict. "Chloe, you have to understand, my mother, she..." I cut him off, not with a shout, but with a look so empty, so devoid of the love I'd once poured into him, that he physically recoiled. He fell silent. He understood nothing. He was a puppet, and his mother was holding the strings. That was the only thing to understand. I zipped the bag, walked past him without a word, and headed for the door. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. If I had, the dam of my composure would have broken. Patricia was standing by the elevator, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She didn't say goodbye. She just watched me go, as if she were watching a servant being dismissed. The doorman, a kind man named Frank, who I'd always chatted with about the weather, looked at me with such pity in his eyes that it almost broke me. He held the door open, and as I stepped out into the chilly October air, the sounds of the city seemed unnaturally loud, alien. I had nowhere to go. My fingers, numb and clumsy, managed to dial the one number I knew I could. Maya, my best friend, my former mentor at the city planning office, the one person who had never bought the Hawthorne family's act. She answered on the second ring. "Chloe, how'd the celebration go? Did you tell him about Apex?" A single ragged sob escaped my lips. "Maya," I whispered, my voice cracking. Can I come over?" She didn't need to ask another question. The raw pain in my voice was enough. "I'm on my way. Don't move. Tell me where you are." I spent that night on Maya's worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped in an old university sweatshirt that smelled like her, like safety, and that's when the dam finally broke. The tears came in a torrent, hot and furious. It was a grief so total it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside out. It wasn't just the loss of Leo, or the home, it was the death of a belief, the belief that I was loved, that I was worthy, that the last 5 years of my life had meant something. The humiliation was a physical entity, a poison ivy rash on my soul. They had played me so perfectly. As the hours ticked by, and the city outside Maya's window grew quiet, my grief began to curdle into something else, something harder, rage, and with the rage came the memories, replaying in my mind, not as fond recollections, but as exhibits in a trial. I remembered the very first time I met Patricia. It was at a brunch at their country club. I'd worn a new floral dress, trying so hard to make a good impression. She'd looked me up and down, a flicker of something cold in her eyes before she arranged her face into a smile. "Leo, she's lovely," she'd said, then turned to me, and so, resourceful. "It's wonderful that you've done so well for yourself, dear. Coming from a state school, Leo's time at Princeton was, well, it opens certain doors, you understand." It was a masterclass in smiling condescension, making my achievements sound like a quaint little hobby compared to their effortless superiority. Leo had just squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to let it go, and I did. For him, I remembered planning our wedding. My dream was a small rustic affair, at a vineyard upstate, Patricia had listened to my ideas with patient amusement, like a mother listening to a child's fantasy of living on the moon. Then, she'd gently but inexorably taken over. A vineyard is a lovely thought, Chloe, but the Hawthorne family has certain traditions, certain expectations. The city ballroom is already booked. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. I'll handle everything. It became her party, a showcase for her social circle. My parents, who had saved up to contribute, were made to feel like poor relations, their simple heartfelt toast overshadowed by Patricia's grand theatrical speech about family legacy and breeding. Leo had told me it was easier to just let her have her way. And I did, for him. I remembered the day they gave us the condo. We were at their lawyer's office, a place with dark wood paneling, and the hushed, intimidating atmosphere of old money. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Garrison, who had served their family for 40 years, directed every single question to Leo and Patricia. He'd slide documents across the polished mahogany table, and Leo would sign them without even reading. I was a spectator. At the end, Mr. Garrison had handed me a beautiful leather-bound folder. "A welcome packet, Mrs. Hawthorne," he'd corrected himself with a thin smile. "Everything you need to know about the building's amenities." I was so blinded by the grandeur of the gift, so desperate for their approval, that I never thought to ask the one question that mattered: where is my name on the deed? I just trusted Leo, my husband. I trusted him completely. That was my greatest mistake. Lying there on Maya's couch, the past year flashed before my eyes. Leo's growing distance, the hushed phone calls, the sudden business trips that I now suspected were strategy sessions with his mother. I recalled one specific night, just a few weeks ago. I'd walked into the study, and he'd slammed his laptop shut, a guilty look on his face. "Just family trust stuff," he'd said quickly. "Boring. You wouldn't be interested." He was lying. He was finalizing the plans for my execution. They hadn't just tricked me. They had studied me. They knew I was an outsider, that I had no family money or power to fight back with. They knew I loved Leo enough to ignore 1,000 tiny cuts. They weaponized my love against me. They built me a beautiful prison and convinced me it was a palace. The first rays of dawn were starting to filter through Maya's blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The tears had stopped. My body was exhausted, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. The grief was still there, a hard, cold stone in my chest, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. Something else was taking root in the ashes of my old life. A cold, quiet, and utterly resolute anger. They thought I was a naive girl. They could discard like trash. They thought I was weak. They saw me as a temporary decoration in their perfect lives. My eyes fell on my laptop, which I had grabbed along with my purse on my way out. I opened it. The screen illuminated my face in the dim light. There it was, the folder, Apex Urban Design. Inside was the fully executed, legally binding contract with the city, the culmination of my life's work, my escape plan, which had now become my weapon. It wasn't about revenge. When I first drafted the proposal, it was about creating something beautiful and useful for the city, about proving to myself that I could build something on my own. It was about my future, but lying there, in the wreckage of the life they had torched, I looked at the legal descriptions, the parcel numbers, the neat little lines on the map that encompassed the Hawthorne block, the building where my entire world had collapsed just hours before. And a new thought, sharp and clear as a shard of glass, pierced through my despair. It wasn't about revenge. Until it was. My career wasn't something that happened by accident. It was forged in the fires of ambition and necessity. Unlike Leo, who had his future handed to him on a silver platter, engraved with the Hawthorne family crest, I had to build mine from the ground up. I'd worked my way through a competitive urban planning program at a public university, graduating at the top of my class. My first job was a grueling, low-paying position in the city's planning department. It was a bureaucratic maze of red tape and political maneuvering, but I loved it. I loved the complexity of it, the challenge of seeing a neglected, forgotten part of the city, and imagining what it could become. I saw the city as a living organism, and my job was to help it breathe, to create arteries of transit and parks like green lungs. For 7 years, I learned the system from the inside. I learned about zoning codes, environmental impact statements, public-private partnerships, and most importantly, I learned where the political bodies were buried. While Leo and his mother saw me as someone who played with maps, I was becoming an expert in the invisible architecture of power that shaped our metropolis. I saw firsthand how wealthy, entrenched families like the Hawthorns could influence city development, stalling projects that served the public good if they interfered with their private interests. Their block, the Hawthorne block, was a perfect example. It was a prime piece of downtown real estate, a mix of luxury residential buildings like the one I'd lived in, a few aging but profitable commercial properties, and a private parking garage that generated obscene amounts of money. For over a decade, the city had been trying to launch the Keystone Transit Initiative, a new light rail hub that would connect 3 major lines and revitalize the entire downtown core. And for a decade, every proposed location had been shot down, often due to unforeseen logistical hurdles or community opposition that I knew were secretly orchestrated by powerful interests. The Hawthorne block was the obvious, most logical location. It was the nexus point, but it was considered politically untouchable. Nobody wanted to pick a fight with Patricia Hawthorne and her army of lawyers. About a year ago, around the time of my wedding, the gnawing feeling that my life was not entirely my own began to take hold. I loved Leo, but I felt my own ambitions shrinking to fit his world. The idea for Apex Urban Design started as a daydream, a secret blueprint for a life where I was the architect. I started working on it in my spare time, on weekends when Leo was at the country club or at some family obligation. I wasn't invited to. I didn't tell him at first. It was mine, my secret garden. My partner in this clandestine venture was Maya. Maya had left the city planning department a few years before me for a high-paying but soul-crushing job at a corporate consulting firm. We'd meet for coffee, and she'd complain about her soulless work, and I'd complain about my latest run-in with Patricia. She was the only one I could be completely honest with. She saw the Hawthorns for what they were from day one. "Chloe, they're emotional vampires," she'd say, stirring her latte. "Patricia doesn't want a daughter-in-law, she wants a hostage. And Leo is suffering from the most advanced case of Stockholm Syndrome I've ever seen." When I told her my idea for Apex, her eyes lit up. "Yes, you have to do this, Chloe. You're the most brilliant planner I know. You see things other people don't." Maya, with her sharp financial mind, helped me draft the business plan. She ran the numbers, built the projections. She was going to be my CFO, my partner. We were going to build an empire of our own. The Keystone Transit Initiative became my obsession. I saw it as the perfect debut project for Apex. It was audacious, challenging, and meaningful. I spent months, hidden away in my home office, the one in their condo, working on a proposal that was so meticulous, so data-driven, so utterly compelling that the city couldn't ignore it. I didn't just suggest the Hawthorne block, I proved it was the only viable option. My proposal showed that by using that specific site, the city would save an estimated $75 million in tunneling and infrastructure rerouting costs. I created traffic flow simulations, economic benefit analyses, and a phased construction plan that would minimize disruption. I framed it not as an attack on a powerful family, but as a bold, fiscally responsible act of civic stewardship. I was using their own language, the language of money and power, against them. I remember one late night, a few months before the end. Maya was over, and we were looking at the schematic spread across my dining room table. She pointed a finger at the outline of the condo building. "Are you really sure about this, Chloe?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You know who owns this. This isn't just business, this is biblical." I looked at the map, at the neat lines, representing a life that was slowly suffocating me. "It's the right location, Maya," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "The data doesn't lie. It has nothing to do with them." I see now that I was lying to myself. Of course it had something to do with them. It was my subconscious crying out for escape, building a catapult to launch myself out of their orbit, to add another layer of plausibility, another shield of bureaucratic impersonality. I leveraged my old contacts. I knew that for a project this sensitive to get a fair hearing, it needed an internal champion, someone insulated from political pressure. And I thought of Mark, Leo's cousin Mark. He was a quiet, unassuming numbers guy, who worked as a mid-level analyst in the city finance department. The Hawthornes, especially Patricia, treated him with a kind of benign contempt. I vividly recalled a Thanksgiving dinner, where Patricia had patted his arm and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "We're all so proud of Mark for his civic service. It's so important to have people willing to do those little jobs." The insult was breathtaking. She made his career sound like he was collecting garbage. Mark had just smiled thinly and said nothing, but I saw the flicker of resentment in his eyes. He wasn't a powerhouse, but he was a gatekeeper. His department had to sign off on the financial viability of all major municipal projects. My proposal, with its massive cost-saving projections, would land on his desk. He was a man who appreciated good, clean numbers, and I was giving him a masterpiece. I knew he would recognize its merit, and bound by his professional ethics, would have to champion it. It was a subtle institutional checkmate. The day I got the call that the city had accepted my proposal and was awarding the primary consulting contract to my newly formed firm, Apex Urban Design, I felt a dizzying sense of euphoria. It was real. I had done it. I had built my own lifeboat. I called Leo, my voice giddy with excitement, and told him I'd gotten a huge promotion. It was a lie of omission. Of course, I was planning to tell him the whole truth that night. Over our celebratory champagne, I imagined his surprise, his pride. I thought, foolishly, that this achievement, this proof of my brilliance and value, would finally be enough to earn his respect, to make him see me as an equal, to finally fully choose me over his mother. The irony is so thick, it's almost suffocating. I was celebrating the contract that would give me my freedom, while they were putting the final touches on the paperwork that they believed would be my ruin. They timed my execution perfectly. But they had no idea I had already built my own gallows for them, right in the heart of their kingdom. The first official move wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a cleverly worded email from me. It was far colder, far more terrifying than that. It was the sterile, impersonal machinery of government grinding into motion. 2 weeks after I had moved into Maya's spare room, the city planning department, as per legal statute, sent out a round of certified letters. These weren't junk mail. They came in stiff, important-looking envelopes bearing the official city seal, and they required a signature upon receipt. One was delivered to every single registered property owner on the 4-square block area, now officially designated as the Keystone Transit Nexus. I can picture the scene so vividly. A letter arrives at the sprawling Hawthorne estate in the suburbs where Patricia lived. A maid probably signed for it. Patricia, perhaps annoyed at the interruption to her morning coffee, would have slit it open with a silver letter opener. Her eyes, accustomed to scanning invitations and stock reports, would have seen the words, "Official Notice of Intent to Acquire Property Under Eminent Domain." Confusion would have been the first reaction. Then irritation. This was a bureaucratic mistake, a nuisance. She would have immediately called Leo. "Leo, the city has sent the most ridiculous letter. Some nonsense about our building downtown. Call Garrison and have him sort this out. I want it gone by lunchtime." Leo, ever the dutiful son, would have called their family lawyer, Mr. Garrison. He'd be confident, arrogant even. This is what men like him, paid men like Garrison for, to make problems disappear. But the problem wouldn't disappear. Mr. Garrison, for all his bluster and exorbitant fees, would have had to deliver the news that no Hawthorne was accustomed to hearing. "Patricia, Leo," I can imagine him saying, his voice losing some of its usual unctuous confidence over the phone. "This is not a mistake, it's a formal declaration for the Keystone Transit Initiative. I've been hearing whispers about this for months, but I thought it was dead. It seems a new proposal was pushed through, and it's airtight." Patricia's voice would have turned to ice. "Airtight? Don't be ridiculous, Howard. We are the Hawthorns, we don't get acquired. You fight this, you file an injunction, you call the mayor, you do what we pay you to do, and here is where the first crack in their impenetrable fortress would have appeared. I can't," Garrison would have to admit, the words probably tasting like ash in his mouth. "The city's justification is public use, which is the gold standard for eminent domain. They're citing overwhelming public benefit and a massive cost saving for the taxpayer. The proposal that got this passed is formidable. It's legally bulletproof. We can fight it, yes. We can spend years and millions of your dollars in court, but Patricia, we will lose. The best we can do is negotiate the price." The silence on the other end of the line must have been deafening. Patricia Hawthorne, a woman who could bend reality to her will with a single phone call, had just been told she was powerless. It would be an utterly alien concept to her. Her fury would have been magnificent, a hurricane tearing through their soundproofed world. She would have blamed everyone. The mayor, who was in her pocket on other matters. The city council, a bunch of spineless bureaucrats. A rival family, perhaps, trying to make a power play. But the one person they would never ever suspect was me. In their minds, I was a crumpled tissue, a sad little footnote in their grand family history. I was probably, they imagined, crying into a bowl of cereal in some dingy furnished apartment, trying to figure out how to pay my first month's rent. The idea that I could be the architect of their demise was so far outside their realm of possibility, it simply wouldn't compute. Their arrogance was my greatest shield. They were so busy looking down on me that they never saw me rising up above them. The panic would have started to set in for Leo. He wasn't a builder like his grandfather or a schemer like his mother. He was a manager, a custodian of wealth he had never earned. He understood balance sheets, and he would have quickly realized what this meant. The condo building was one thing, but the notice would have applied to the whole block. The commercial building that housed a bank branch on a lucrative long-term lease, the other smaller retail spaces, and the crown jewel of their passive income, the 500-space parking garage that was essentially a license to print money. All of it, gone. Not sold on their terms, for a massive profit, but acquired for fair market value, a number determined by city assessors. A number that would never account for the Hawthorne ego or their projections of future worth. Their legacy, the source of their power and social standing, was being systematically dismantled by an anonymous government entity. They were facing a threat they couldn't bully, couldn't buy, and couldn't control. And I, in my temporary office, a small sunlit room I'd subleased with the advance from the city, was quietly getting to work. Maya and I were unboxing computers and setting up desks. I had a huge city map pinned to one wall, the Keystone Nexus area outlined in red. I'd look at it, at the building where I had been so happy and then so broken, and I didn't feel a triumphant thrill. I felt a strange, cold calm. This wasn't a game, this was pest control. The first visible signs of the takeover began to appear about a month after the notices went out. It started subtly. A for lease sign in the window of the boutique cafe on the ground floor of our old building was taken down, not replaced by a new tenant, but by a stark official-looking placard from the city. Then, the dry cleaner next door, a family-run business for 30 years, announced they were closing and relocating. The slow, quiet exodus had begun. Each departure was another brick being pulled from the foundation of the Hawthorns' little kingdom. The most satisfying moment came via a text from Maya. She sent me a photo she'd snapped on her way to our office. It was of the massive billboard on top of the Hawthorne-owned parking garage. For years, it had advertised luxury watches. Now it was a giant, city-sponsored banner that read, "The future is moving, the Keystone Transit Nexus. Coming soon." Patricia must have seen it. The sheer public audacity of it would have felt like a personal violation. Her family's name was being literally papered over with the very project that was destroying them. That's when the desperation started. That's when my silence became more than they could bear. Leo started calling. At first, I just let the calls go to voicemail. The messages he left were a masterclass in manipulative pseudo-concern. "Chloe, it's me. I know you're probably not ready to talk, but I just wanted to see if you're okay. I'm worried about you." Click. A day later. "Chloe, I heard about this awful eminent domain thing the city is doing. It's affecting the building. I can't imagine how you must feel, being forced out like that. It's just terrible." The irony of him lamenting me being forced out was so rich, so profoundly lacking in self-awareness, that I almost laughed. When his calls went unanswered, he switched to emails. Long rambling messages about our history, about the good times. He was trying to find the old Chloe, the one who would soothe his anxieties and forgive his weaknesses. But that Chloe was gone. She had burned to ash on the floor of their condo. The final desperate move came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in a meeting with Maya and 2 civil engineers we'd just hired. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Sarah, buzzed my office. "Chloe, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Mr. Hawthorne here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." My blood ran cold for a second, then turned to ice. Maya shot me a look, her eyes wide. I took a deep breath. "It's fine, Sarah. Send him in." Leo walked into my office. My office, the headquarters of Apex Urban Design. The look on his face was a complicated cocktail of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. He looked around at the professional space, at the architectural models, at the busy employees in the bullpen outside my glass walls. This was not the picture he had in his head of the pathetic, broken woman he'd thrown away. "Chloe," he stammered, his eyes finally landing on me. I was sitting behind my large oak desk. I didn't stand up, I didn't smile, I just looked at him. What is all this? It's my firm, I said, my voice even and calm. He shook his head, as if trying to clear it. Your promotion, this was your promotion. This was my life's work, I corrected him gently. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his composure crumbling. Chloe, we need to talk. My mother, she's a mess. This city project, it's destroying our family legacy. The properties on that block have been in my family for generations. You of all people, you understand legacy, don't you? There it was, the appeal to a sense of tradition and family that he knew I had once craved to be a part of. He was still trying to play the old game, using the old rules. He had no idea the game had changed, and I was the one writing the new rulebook. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the desk. No, Leo, I don't think I do, I said, my voice dangerously soft. My understanding was that I was just a temporary guest in your world. Your mother and you made that very clear. The Hawthorne legacy has nothing to do with me. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his compliant girlfriend or his decorative wife, but as a stranger, a formidable one. But we can fight this, he pleaded, taking a step closer to my desk. Together, you know the city, you have contacts. You could help us. We could, I don't know. We could work something out. He was grasping at straws, his voice laced with a panic I had never heard before. He was looking at me, but I knew he was seeing the dwindling numbers on a trust fund balance sheet. I stood up then, a silent dismissal. I walked to the window of my office, which overlooked a different part of the city, a part I was already eyeing for my next project. There's nothing to work out, Leo, I said, not turning to look at him. You need to leave. I have a meeting. He just stood there for a moment, utterly defeated. The power dynamic, the one that had defined our entire relationship, had not just shifted, it had been inverted, shattered, and remade. He was the one begging, I was the one in control. As he turned and walked out of my office, past the curious eyes of my employees, I knew he was going back to his mother, not with a solution, but with an even more terrifying problem. The woman they thought they had erased was thriving, and for some reason they couldn't yet comprehend. She was completely, terrifyingly indifferent to their fate. The final act didn't take place in a dramatic courtroom showdown or a tearful late-night confrontation. It happened in the most mundane and soul-crushing of venues, a fluorescent-lit, beige-walled conference room at the city municipal building. It was the final public hearing for the Keystone Transit Nexus, a procedural formality to allow property owners to voice any last concerns before the acquisitions were finalized. It was a bureaucratic rubber stamp, but Patricia, in her infinite arrogance, had insisted on attending with Leo and Mr. Garrison, clinging to the sliver of a hope that she could make some grand emotional appeal and sway public opinion. I arrived with Maya and my team of engineers. I was dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, my hair pulled back in a sleek, professional bun. I was no longer Chloe, the scorned wife. I was Miss Davies, the lead consultant from Apex Urban Design. We entered the conference room, and I saw them immediately. They were sitting at the long table, a grim little trinity of defeated privilege. Patricia was ramrod straight, her face a kabuki mask of strained composure, but her eyes were frantic. Leo looked hollowed out, aged 10 years in a matter of weeks. Mr. Garrison just looked exhausted, like a man who knew he was there to preside over a funeral. They hadn't seen me yet. They were focused on the city council members at the head of the table. The meeting was called to order. A councilwoman, a no-nonsense woman, named Peterson, began with the opening remarks. And as we move to the final implementation phase, I'd like to thank all the city departments for their hard work, and especially the consulting firm, whose innovative proposal made this financially and logistically possible. I'd like to invite the head of Apex Urban Design, Miss Chloe Davies, to walk us through the final timeline. My name, my real name, the name I was born with, not the one I had borrowed. I stood up and walked to the podium at the front of the room. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, but I was only aware of 3. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp. I didn't look at them. Not yet. I arranged my notes on the lectern, took a sip of water, and looked directly at Councilwoman Peterson. "Thank you, Madam Councilwoman," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "For the record, my name is Chloe Davies, principal at Apex Urban Design. As outlined in our Phase 4 projection, the preliminary demolition and site prep for the Hawthorne block is scheduled to begin in 60 days. I continued speaking for 10 minutes, my presentation crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. I talked about job creation, about increased public access, about the long-term economic benefits for the city. I used words like optimization, efficiency, and progress. Each word was a perfectly polished stone being laid on the grave of their legacy. I could feel Patricia's stare burning into the side of my face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The confusion had vanished, replaced by a horrifying, complete understanding. This wasn't a random act of government. This wasn't a rival family. This was me, the quiet, malleable girl she had so carelessly tried to break, had returned as an unstoppable force of nature. When I finished my presentation, Councilwoman Peterson thanked me and opened the floor to comments from the affected property owners. Garrison stood up and made a weak, perfunctory statement about ensuring his clients receive just compensation. And then Patricia stood up. She couldn't help herself. The mask cracked. "This is a sham," she declared, her voice shrill, echoing in the quiet room. "This entire project is nothing but a personal vendetta." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Ooh. She did this. That woman, she was my daughter-in-law. She is doing this to destroy my family out of spite." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Councilwoman Peterson banged her gavel. "Order, ma'am. If you have a relevant legal objection, please have your counsel state it. We are not here to air personal grievances." For the first time, I turned my head and looked directly at her. I let my eyes meet hers, and I held her gaze. I didn't look angry. I didn't look triumphant. I looked at her with a kind of profound, clinical pity. "Patricia," I said, my voice calm, not amplified by the microphone, but carrying clearly across the room. "This is business. It's a city revitalization project. You, of all people, should understand the importance of choosing a strong, stable foundation to build on." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "It's just a shame your family's assets were located on such unstable ground." The final, crushing blow came from the city's legal counsel, who chose that moment to clarify a point. And just for the record, the fair market value assessment for all properties was completed, as per statute, 60 days ago, prior to the public announcement of the Keystone Initiative. The city's offer is based on that assessment. It is final and non-negotiable. I saw the last bit of color drain from Leo's face. He understood what that meant. They weren't being paid based on the future, skyrocketing value of land with a new transit hub. They were being paid for the land as it was. A collection of aging buildings and a parking garage. It was a fair price, legally, but for them, it was a pittance, a fraction of what they believed their birthright was worth. They had been surgically removed from their own future. I gathered my papers, gave a slight nod to the council, and walked out of the room with Maya by my side. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over. I had won. In the months that followed, my new life began to take shape, built not on their gilded cage, but on a foundation of my own making. Apex Urban Design flourished. The successful launch of the Keystone Project became our calling card, and contracts for other city revitalization projects started pouring in. We moved into a larger office, hired more staff, and became a recognized name in urban development. My work, the thing they had dismissed as a little hobby, was now building the very city they used to believe they owned. I found a new apartment, a loft in a converted warehouse in a different part of town. It wasn't as luxurious as the condo, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every plant on the windowsill was chosen and paid for by me. The sense of peace I felt within those walls was something no amount of Hawthorne money could ever buy. Maya and I would often work late, then order takeout and drink cheap wine, spreading new blueprints across my coffee table, dreaming up the future. We were happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. As for the Hawthorns, their downfall was as quiet and complete as I had planned it to be. The loss of the downtown properties dealt a devastating blow to their finances. The fair market value they received was substantial by any normal standard, but for them, it was a catastrophic loss of their primary cash flow assets. They had to sell their sprawling estate in the suburbs and downsize significantly. Patricia's social standing withered. Without the endless fountain of money to fund her charities and host her lavish parties, her influence evaporated. She became a ghost in the high society circles she once commanded. Leo was adrift, stripped of the wealth and power that had always defined him. He was just a man, and not a particularly strong one. I heard through the grapevine, from Mark, my quiet ally in the finance department, who occasionally sent me discreetly pleased emails, that Leo had tried to get a job on his own merits and had failed spectacularly. He was left as the sole caretaker of his bitter, defeated mother, trapped in a smaller, less opulent prison of her making. Their punishment wasn't a dramatic, fiery explosion, it was the slow, inevitable collapse of a structure built on a rotten foundation. They weren't defeated by me, not really. They were defeated by their own arrogance, their own cruelty, and their own profound underestimation of the person they tried to throw away. It's funny, isn't it? They thought the condo, their great act of deceptive generosity, was their ultimate weapon. They saw it as the ultimate symbol of their power over me. But they were wrong. My greatest weapon was the one they never saw, the one they never bothered to value. My mind, my ambition, and my absolute refusal to stay broken. They tried to write me out of their story, so I decided to rewrite the entire map. It was never about the money, or the buildings, or even the revenge, not in the end. It was about taking back the pen, and writing my own ending. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been put in a box, defined by someone else's narrow expectations? Have you ever had to shrink yourself to make someone else feel big? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want you to know, you are not alone. And if you enjoyed my story, and want to hear more tales of people taking back their power, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. It feels good to finally tell the whole story. In my own words,